So, thanks for the welcome. Yeah, this talk, like Mike said, if you don't know Mike, you may be surprised about him ranting about things. So, this is something that I've cared about for quite some time. It's just grown and grown and grown, and it's what I've seen, some changes in society and amongst us people, is the idea that somehow we are getting to a culture that is averse to adversity. We look around and we see that people are clamoring for safe spaces. People want to block speakers from being on college campuses. They want to cancel parades because some particular group is participating there. And we're finding this I think, throughout our society. We run into it with things at work, with challenges at work. We run into this with society in a whole. We run into this certainly with us as individuals. And the thing is that adversity is not bad. We don't need to be as fearful of it as I think we've become. Dealing with different opinions is how we grow as individuals, how we grow as a culture, by appreciating different views, no matter how different they may be. And I think most importantly, we humans, frankly, we suck. But adversity and learning to deal with it brings out some of the best things that are core to us as good humans. So I wanted to talk about first adversity at work. And please be clear, this is not old man Jim up here ranting about you kids these days. It's not something ranting about millennials. This is us as a race, us as a society, us as a culture. And it's interesting because somehow we seem to have lost track of the notion that hard work is required. So we look at schools. There are participation awards. Everybody's a winner. Everybody gets a ribbon. Everybody gets a medal. You can take as long as you need with your test. Oh, you didn't get the test done? Here, we'll give you some more time. You didn't like the outcomes of that? Let's have some more. Oh, you have worked a few days on this project. We'll give you some form of recognition. And all of this brings a lot of baggage as we move into different areas of what some people affectionately call the real world. So there's a quote here that has, in various forms, been attributed to Bill Gates or to Kurt Vonnegut, and the strippers that work at Snopes have determined that that's actually not where it came from. They can't even actually find out where it came from, but I think there's some interesting points, specifically about the notion that we've lost track of effort and results. And it's interesting. So I've been in consulting for quite a while. I've worked with a lot of product companies. When I talk about clients, that's just my vernacular, right? But the idea of you're working for somebody, and as you are new to a team or new to an organization, more and more people seem to want immediate rewards. So you go into a global, let's say, auto manufacturing company, you're new there, and you've got the idea that within a very short time, you have to see an impact. You have to see results. Not results for the organization, not results for the client, but that narcissistic thing of, I haven't been recognized for my worth. I'm not being acknowledged. Okay, acknowledgement and support and recognition, yeah, that's all an important part of leadership and of good management. But if we're expecting somehow to go in and after 2 weeks have shifted the course of an organization to match our needs, we've lost track of something rather important there. We've lost track of the empathy and the things that we should be thinking about the organization. Things may be certain ways because that organization may be 50 or 100 years old. And trying to change that is effectively trying to push the iceberg that sank the Titanic around. This frustration can build up more and more and more to the point where some of those teams become dysfunctional because they feel that the focus isn't on them rather than the client. I know I'm out of frame, but I ate my coffee. So part of this difficulty here of trying to deal with that is how do we work with people that have that mindset and try to change that a little bit to make them more effective. But we've also got problems in the workspace with dealing with difficult colleagues. So any of you on your teams or your organizations have folks that are a little hard to get along with, a little egotistical, that person who everything's done wrong and they know better. Got any of that? The person who's always grumpy.
Me.
I've been that guy. Where's Mike? Anybody ever have to work with a pairing partner who has personal hygiene challenges? Me. I took a shower this morning, by the way, but you're probably all done ways away. So these sorts of things bring their own challenges, right? Who likes the feeling of trying to go in and work with that very arrogant developer or architect or tester, I'm a tester, by the way, and try to get them to the point where they can effectively communicate? Is that something anybody enjoys? One person in the room. Good for you. There's probably a psychosis club about that, I don't know. So this challenge, this discomfort of trying to work with those folks and get to a resolution is not something easy. Only one person in the entire room here raised their hand that they like that kind of challenge. So me personally, I've had to deal with a number of situations. That personal hygiene thing, yes, I had a coworker and he was going through a rough spot in life and he was not taking a bath. Once in a month. It was so bad that people were getting physically ill if they had to be in the same room with him. I wasn't his boss. I didn't even speak the native language. I was living in a foreign country at the time, and workers came to me to ask me to get him to fix the problem. I've been in places where somebody new on the team was a brilliant technical person, but had no clue about how to communicate things. So as a result, they were coming across as pushy, as arrogant, as overbearing. Nobody wanted to pair with them. Person even got kicked off of one client team. Sound kind of familiar? Have you been around folks like that? We don't like having to try to step into that space and address those problems with that person. Because that is challenging, that's hard. Now, there's been some interesting discoveries over the last decade or so in medical science dealing with how the brain works with discomfort and pain. And if you go out and you Google Adrian Lowe, that's kind of the starting point. There's a lot of very fascinating actual science-based research that talks about how the brain moves from something that's uncomfortable to turning that into almost a fight or flight situation. So imagine that there's somebody's got a wound on their neck, okay? The wound's okay, it's been stitched up, it's healing up, but there's a wound there. The brain cares about protecting that wound so it doesn't get damaged as it's trying to heal. It's pretty straightforward, right? Okay, the thing is that research is finding the brain actually escalates things up so that if I'm moving my shoulder around, that's kind of moving that bit of the neck area where that wound might be, and normally there should be some discomfort there, right? There was a wound there, obvious. The brain, though, is trying to protect that. So when there's a gentle bit of movement that would normally cause discomfort, the brain actually moves that up to a pain signal. So it's not just uncomfortable, but rather, wait a minute, something's going on here, this isn't right, be careful. Well, that's actually not enough. If you let your brain take control of this, it will move that further to where this now becomes a danger signal. So there's a small bit of non-damaging, non-threatening movement or pressure or whatever, and the brain turns that from pain to, holy crap, there's something dramatically wrong. The brain will go so far as to actually extend sort of the worry zone out. There's a term called hypersensitivity, and the body actually I keep covering up the mic, that's probably not what I want to do. So instead of just being focused in on where this wound is, the entire shoulder and chest might become hypersensitive, so that if I just touch skin or put on clothing far away from where the wound actually is, the brain overreacts and generates not just discomfort, not just pain, but a danger signal. So as you're working with an occupational therapist, when you're trying to deal with a bad wound, the OT will be telling you, you have to listen to what your brain is telling you for these hypersensitive areas, and you have to force your brain to ratchet back down that no, this isn't a danger situation. This is regular life and healing. Okay, it's not too much of a jump to take that understanding of how our brain works, the psychology of that, and see that those difficult situations where, oh, wait a minute, there's somebody who is overly aggressive, there's somebody with an ego, there is somebody who is pushing me or challenging me, and change that just from uncomfortable to wanting to avoid the situation entirely. That's pretty powerful, because we actually can control our brain and try to dial it down from that danger situation back down to discomfort. This isn't just about pain, this is about how the brain deals with challenging or difficult situations. The thing is, if we don't control that, what are the costs to us? Well, at work, we are losing the best teams that we possibly could have. That very arrogant, egotistical person that's on the team may actually know some very applicable things that might be helpful. So this one person that I had worked with who had literally been pushed off of a client team. We worked on some things through this whole field of study called emotional intelligence. And that person has, since in the years, turned into actually a great leader who runs teams, who helps organizations. But if I wouldn't have gotten through that uncomfortable space there, that person wouldn't have gotten that feedback. And I didn't solve that, right? This person did. But it came about from somebody being willing to step through that uncomfortable, adverse situation there. We're also losing the best results for our clients or our organizations. Things become dysfunctional because people can't communicate. They won't work through those challenges of communication or personalities. I've seen this when I was in the military. I used to fly an aircraft. I wasn't a pilot, but I was a crew member and was sitting in the cockpit while we were doing emergency drills, landing with one engine of 4 turned off. So it was simulating an engine failure, right? So you're on a big aircraft, you pull back the throttle on one of the 4 engines, and now the plane is a little unstable because you've got uneven thrust, right? So you got 2 engines on one side, 1 engine on the other. And I'm sitting in the cockpit watching these 2 pilots, the co-pilot who's young and rather cocky and a little arrogant, and the instructor pilot who's also cocky and arrogant. If any of you know military pilots, this will not be any surprise to you. The problem comes though when that cockiness and arrogance stops effective communication. So they're arguing and arguing and arguing. They come in, they're on final approach, and there's actually discipline around certain phases of flight where you have a quiet cockpit. And the idea is that you've got a big damn aircraft. Be quiet and fly the damn plane. And instead, they're squabbling. A big gust of wind hits just as the pilot touches down. It shifts the plane. The seasoned pilot realizes that there's an issue, grabs the throttles and throws them forward, but he misses the one throttle that was pulled back to simulate the engine being failed. So now we're already like this. The thrust pushes us even further. We bounce into the air, and the next thing I know, as I'm in the cockpit, I'm looking out the window, and the runway is way over there, and we are over the parking pad for a bunch of fighters, and all I can see are all of the ground crew running because they think that we're next going to land and bounce right in the middle of them. Almost cost 30 people on that plane their life for a number of reasons, but part of it was, the main part of it was, 2 people not being able to step back and get past that uncomfortable part and communicate effectively. Most communication failures are not quite so dramatic. So, this adversity isn't just in the workplace. I think if you take a look around, unless you've been living under a rock or in a cave somewhere, you may have noticed that in the current environment, we're rather polarized and everyone's offended at everything. So we had one of the nastiest electoral cycles that we've had in centuries. I don't know, going back to when people were still dueling about things. You can't blame me about the outcome. I didn't vote for either major candidate. I voted for sweet meteor of death. Because I didn't like either major candidate. So we're finding, though, that this has gone to extremes where we don't even want to listen to a different point of view. Christina Hoff Sommers is a brilliant, fantastic writer and political commentary person. She went to a college to speak about one of her main areas of focus, which is her vast disapproval of feminism as it is currently framed. Well, going to a liberal arts college and speaking about things may go a little crazy here. Look. Oh, there we go. So there was this crazy uprising, people going nuts in the audience. She didn't even get a chance to speak. This woman here actually has a name, however, because of her antics, she instantly became known as Trigglypuff on social media. She was screaming, she was crying, she was one of a number of people that eventually the speaker, Christina Hoff Sommers, had to just stop and leave the stage. Well, okay, that's one side of stupidity. Our current president, during some of his political rallies, you may remember that there were people who were sucker punching protesters as they were being escorted out. So here's the other end of it, right? And both of these people could be total caricatures of everything that we see in those who hold views that we find offensive, right? So, Trigglypuff, the overweight, ugly, nasty social justice warrior. Hickman, the redneck hick, who can't stand black people, who hates anybody that doesn't just toe the line for what Trump says. It goes further and further and further.
A quick break here to explain something that a couple people in the audience and maybe a few of you viewers might miss. You'll notice I used very inflammatory descriptors of both Trigglypuff, the woman protesting Christina Hoff Sommers, as well as one of the sucker punch guys at Trump's rallies. This was an intentional rhetorical device I was trying to use to emphasize how we other or push people away who have very strong differing opinions. I used those words intentionally. However, what I should have done right at this point was call that action out. Meaning, I wouldn't use those descriptors of those folks normally. A lot of folks at KalamazooX, most of the audience, got what I was doing, and hopefully you as a viewer understand that as well. A few people at KalamazooX didn't get that, and they were very offended at the phrasing I used. Kind of underscores the point, but what I as a speaker should have done was make sure to drive home that I was using that rhetorical tool of exaggerating and overblown stuff to try to illustrate a point. So, my bad as a speaker, but I don't back down from the words I used or how I approached it. I just should have closed the loop there. So, hopefully this little explanation here helps. Thanks.
Two speakers who tried to talk at Berkeley, Ann Coulter had to cancel her appearance there when Milo Yiannopoulos, a firebrand conservative gay entertainer, I don't know what you'd even call them, when he tried to talk at Berkeley, there was a riot, there were fires, there were assaults, there was over $100,000 of vandalism to property. Charles Murray, author of a very interesting, very misunderstood book called The Bell Curve that talked about IQ and genetics, was doing a talk on a completely different book at Middlebury College. One of the liberal arts teachers there vehemently opposed what he had to say, but welcomed him in because she wanted to hear him talk, she wanted an open debate, she wanted open discussion. There was a riot at the college as this woman who didn't believe what he said tried to help him get out of the area. One of the protesters grabbed her hair and slammed her head back so hard she was in a neck brace for weeks. In my own state of Oregon, the Portland Rose Parade, which has been going on for 50 or 70 years, something like that, was canceled because of threats of violence, because there was going to be a float from a county, from the Republican Party of one county. So this wasn't even threats of violence because of what someone was saying. It was threats of violence because of membership or certain political thoughts. If that doesn't bother you, I'd ask you to step back and take a little time to think about this. The idea that people should be blocked from speaking because of their thoughts or their membership in certain things is, to me, offensive to my very core. What cost do we find when these things come across for our society? We're losing personal growth. We're losing growth as individuals by not listening to these different views. We are losing wisdom that may be found in listening to some of those views. Or also because we're being so focused, we're losing the kindness and empathy for those other humans. Colin Noir is a spokesman and activist for the NRA. And he's got a very interesting video on YouTube where he's talking about safety. And he's on a really interesting rant about there's no guarantee to safety. And in and amongst this 3 or 4 minute long video, I think he's got this one clip that hits home for a lot of different things. And he's talking about the troubling aspect of censoring or barricading people because it makes you feel uncomfortable. It's not a problem with them, that's a problem with you. That's a problem with me about how I feel. Stephen Fry, who I think is amazing, has a great quote on how sensitive we've become to turning into a culture of continually offended people. And the idea that your offense at something somebody else says, I think his closing bit there, so fucking what, is pretty spot on. It's not that we have to embrace or approve of differing views, but we ought to at least accept that people have a right to their opinions. They have a right to say things. The First Amendment to our Constitution guarantees freedom of speech. And courts have been very clear that there's no such thing as hate speech. Oops, too bad. You may not incite or inflame. That's very different. Now, there's a lot of stupid stuff that gets said. I can ignore it. So adversity also strikes, I think, and our unwillingness to deal with adversity can also hit a lot close to home, us as individuals. We have a hard time dealing with things inside of ourselves that, because they're challenging, it's difficult, it's tough. Anybody heard of imposter syndrome? Anybody live imposter syndrome? I do. So imposter syndrome, the idea that you're not good enough, that you're a fake, that you're fraud, a poser, fill in your own word there. That gets in the way of us doing good things. Relationships. We have a hard time dealing with certain aspects of relationships. Doesn't matter if it's me and my wife, me and my daughter, it can be tough. Mental health is an issue that's tough in this culture. Soldiers coming back from wars, not just the current wars in Afghanistan and wherever, but forever have had big stigmas attached to trying to deal with their own mental health. It's easier to deal with a limb that's been blown off than it is to accept the difficulty and the stigma of admitting you have mental health problems. So this is an insulin pen. About 8 years ago, I turned into a type 1 diabetic, so my pancreas stopped producing insulin. Normally this happens for very young people. I was 45 at the time. Shut up, Ethan. For those of you who are new at KalamazooX conference, if you don't hear 2 or 3 insults per talk to Mike, then something's not going right. So,
I love all the speakers.
So, for those of you that aren't familiar with diabetes, it means a total life change. Alterations in how you eat, how you manage your life, exercise, a whole bunch of things. Plus, there are just some health issues that no matter how well you take care of yourself, you're gonna have to deal with for the rest of your life. So I have to use this insulin pen or a little insulin pump to offset sugars that I take in, breads, pasta, whatever. Insulin is one of the 2 or 3 most powerful hormones in the body. And it's so powerful that if you're not careful when you're dosing and managing things, you can drive your blood sugars very low to the point where your brain starts to shut down. And if it gets bad enough, you'll go into a coma. And if you have too much insulin, you not only go to a coma, you die. So, all of this gets dropped on me at about age 45. At the same time, I was having some pretty significant challenges at home with my wife, with my family. The job that I was in at the time was falling apart. All of this started to turn really, really dark. Reached out to some friends trying to get a little bit of help. They were busy with their own lives. Things continued to just kind of spiral down to the point where I was looking at my insulin pens thinking, I can get out of this. All I got to do is just dial that thing up a whole bunch and I'll be out of all this. I'm a firm believer that little moments of grace happen when we are in dire need of some help. I was on the way home listening to a show on NPR, I don't even remember what it was. They were talking with a counselor from a teen suicide organization. And he said that he looked for kids who had a plan because those were the ones at the worst risk. It wasn't just that they were feeling depressed, it wasn't that they were talking about suicide. It was they had a vision of how they were going to do it. I said to myself, shit, that's where I'm at. I have my pens right here. So, within a couple days, got hooked up with a counselor. Counselor was great. She started helping me get some tools to understand depression, to get my hands around it, to understand how to deal with it. Got some medication to help out, and things got better. Dealing with that was awful. Acknowledging it to my family was awful. But it gave me the tools to know when I needed help. It gave me the strength and the confidence that I could deal with it. Which is really important, because the universe was not done with me. On the 10th of January, the universe said, oh, you dealt with depression, you handled that? Here, hold my beer. On 10th of January, I was in Dearborn. My family's back in Oregon. My 12-year-old son decided to murder my wife and attack my dog. Tough time. But I had some strength, and I had some ideas on how to handle things. Had some ideas on where I needed help. We have to learn to deal with adversity. We have to learn to deal with hard things. Because if we don't, we're missing on the strength that we can build. Moreover, we don't know the beauty of us as humans. We don't know the things that we can do. Naomi Shriver-Nye is a world-recognized poet. She has a great poem called Kindness. And it's a medium-length poem, but this part here speaks to that as we move through these struggles, as we move through adversity, as we work with others, this is how we come to understand kindness. And if we don't learn to deal with these things, we also miss on the love that all of us have at our core. So, at one point, as I was struggling with things, 3 a.m. in the middle of a really tough night after I got my daughter home, I had a song that poured out for me. And I had great visions of like being able to sing this verse for you. That's not going to happen because I won't make it. Besides, like if I start singing, everybody runs screaming out. But the point is, we will always have adversity. We will always have challenges. That is life. And we don't have to go and search out things. Nobody likes getting punched in the nose. Nobody likes getting kicked in the groin. That's not what I'm asking you to do. Rather, what I'm asking is that you be open to those differences. You be open to the challenges because it's how we grow. Most importantly, it's how we get in touch with the core of the beautiful things that we stupid, sucky humans are actually awesome at. So, thank you very much for your time, for your listening. I'd also like to thank the community as a whole. Maybe this was the first time you've heard about my situation, that's okay. But I've had tremendous support and love from the community since this horrible tragedy happened to us. There's a couple of things that I'd like to ask each and every one of you to take into mind. First, please, no SharePoint. More importantly, life is short, life is tenuous, life is precious. Make sure those that you love know it. Make sure those that you love know it. Thank you very much.